Hello and welcome to Conversations. Oh, we've got a hair-raising tale for you today. Peter Fitzsimons is here to tell you a really gruesome story of betrayal, sexual slavery, shipwreck and mass murder. And the thing is, it's a true story, and an Australian one too, because it happened just off our coastline. It's the story of the Batavia, the Dutch ship that was wrecked on a reef near the WA coast, way back in the year 1629. On board the ship, the Batavia, there were caskets of gold and silver coins, there were soldiers and families too, and one of the most beautiful women in Holland. They were all on their way to the Dutch spice trading citadel of Batavia on Java. When the ship hit a reef, the passengers were marooned on a few tiny reef islands, and then they were left at the mercy of one of the officers, who was an honest-to-God murdering psychopath. Now, it is a true story, but it seems so strange and gruesome and bizarre. What are the historical records on?
What's known as the predicant's letter, which is the predicant was the preacher on the island. He lost all of his family bar one on the island, so he was with his wife and 6 children. His wife and the five of the children were killed, murdered. Only the beautiful daughter and he were the ones to survive. When he got back to Batavia, which you and I now know as Jakarta, he wrote a long letter to his family in Holland describing what's happened. So that's the first of the primary documents. The other one is Pelsaart's journal. So Pelsaart being the commandeur, the admiral, who not only was on the ship when it hit the reef, then gone for help, but the most important thing is when he got back, without ruining my story now, there was testimony of everybody that was involved.
There was an inquiry.
There was a serious inquiry lasting for weeks. We're under torture. I mean, it was the first version of waterboarding, and all of that testimony has survived.
Let's start right at the beginning of this tale, the spice trade. We have to start with the spice trade. The biggest trade in the world at the time. Spices seem like a kind of trivial luxury to us. Why were they so important to people in the 1600s?
Well, one reason was you put them on your food. There's been a lot of historical discussion about whether or not it could preserve food, rotting meat, and the historians seem evenly divided on that. But a lot of people believed it was an aphrodisiac. So there was a big market. Others believed that it could cure just about any ills whatsoever. Everybody agreed that putting it on food, preparing it right, made food just wonderful. And the point of it was that from those Spice Islands, if you could get an ounce of that for whatever price you could pay, you could sell it at a 600 times markup back in Europe.
So the mission of the Batavia then, Peter, was to take a whole lot of things all the way from Holland to the new Dutch citadel of Batavia.
Yes.
The place we now recognise as Jakarta, the city of Jakarta.
That's right.
Now, what was on board the Batavia?
In the hold, you had 12. The operative thing is you had 12 money chests, chocker, with silver coins. He said it was the greatest assembly of treasure of capital in the one place at the one time that had ever left Holland. Fine furniture for the officials in Batavia. They had wonderful textiles, silk, cloth, velvet. They had
fine wine.
Lots and lots of wine. And so this ship, this Batavia ship, it's got 331 people on board. The setup is there's basically 3 levels. And broadly, the more elite you are in the hierarchy, in the command structure, the higher you are and the further to the back of the ship you are.
And on board there are soldiers?
100 soldiers, and they are the lowest of the low. They're down below, so they're in the darkness and the filth, and their job is partly, really what they're going out to do is to man the barracks, to the attrition rate.
But there are families there as well?
There are.
Kids.
They're basically one level up. There were about 25 women. There were a gaggle of kids, a few babies, because they were also taking out passengers, simple paying passengers who were going out to the Dutch East Indies. And it was a thing, the common thread of most of those on board was desperation. You wouldn't actually get on a ship like that. The attrition rates were so fearful, the voyage so long, the problems with scurvy and pestilence disease were so fearful that it was really a collection, apart from the elite at the top and the back of the ship, most of the rest were desperate.
Now let's talk about the commander, Pelsaart.
Commander Francisco Pelsaart.
Now he's not a Navy guy, is he?
No.
He's not actually the skipper, but he's the commander.
He is in command. He's the representative. He's the chief executive, not the chief executive of the company, but the highest ranking official of the company on the ship. He's the boss.
But he's not the skipper.
Maritime. He's not the skipper.
He's not the skipper. And so you've got this urbane Dutch businessman as the commander.
Exactly.
But the skipper is a different kettle of fish.
Well, the skipper is an old salt, Arjan Jacobs, who is a leader of men, but in a very rough fashion, hard-drinking, rough man, as they were wont to be.
So he's a rough, tough customer, and you're right that he and the record shows he and Pelsart, the businessman, just hated each other's guts, and they'd hated each other's guts before they even got on the boat.
Absolutely, because they'd had a falling out 2 years before. Arjan Jacobs had been in charge of a ship, had been in command of a ship that had taken Pelsart from India back to Holland, and he'd got drunk, and Pelsart had found out about it and
show and all that.
Tore him apart for disgracing the company name.
Now we're going to come to the central figure in this story, a truly terrifying human being, a man called Geronimus Cornelius. So Geronimus Cornelius is a member of this cult that
heretic. It's an heretic cult. You know,
do whatever you like.
Yes, and
take whatever you like,
and no consequences
in the afterlife. Because God must have wanted you to do that if you want to do it.
Exactly. And so Geronimus, desperate to get out of Holland because he's been pursued by the authority, Terentius, who is the leader of the cult, has already been thrown in the dungeon. So he's gone. You know, the authorities are coming. They're closing in. Get me out of here. So Geronimus, at the last instant, because he's an educated man, he can read, he can write, he'd be the highest educated man on the ship practically. He gets on the ship as the under merchant, and the under merchant is pretty much Pelsart's number two. So after Pelsart, this guy, because
he's 2IC,
he's 2IC, but the commercial 2IC, not the maritime 2IC.
So he's not just been a member of this cult; he also has a psychopathic temperament.
Absolutely.
But no one knows that just yet.